Hey folks, this is Jake with Seattle Coffee Gear, and today we have an exciting crew review for you today. This is the much anticipated Fellow Ode brew grinder. And the Fellow Ode was specifically designed from the ground up to be just a little bit different in almost every aspect of grinding from most traditional home grinders. And I'll go into why Fellow has really done a great job on some of the accessories and the building of this grinder, and over why I like it, and a couple of things that I don't. So let's go ahead and start, which is unusual for a grinder, with the accessories themselves. Usually a catch bin, the grind lid, these are not super interesting things, but Fellow did a really great job at making sure that every step of your workflow was as easy as possible. Now the catch bin for the grounds also doubles as a container for when you are single dosing your coffee beans and to measure them out with a pretty rough estimation. Because this grinder does only have an 80 gram or 90 gram capacity, you're really limited to single dosing or smaller batches. This isn't the type of grinder where you'd want 10 ounces of beans, 12 ounces of beans in the hopper. Rather, if you're switching up beans quite a lot, or you just want to get one sample of beans or serving of beans out of your bag at a time, the Ode's going to do you a great job, and the catch bin facilitates that. A couple of things inside of the catch bin that do make it a lot easier are going to be some fins in here, and they kind of act as they focus your pour, whether it's with your beans or with your ground coffee, into one specific area. When you're using something a little bit smaller, like the choke of this grinder hopper, it's super easy to pour these beans in just a little bit at a time, and it makes it really nice and clean and simple. On the inside, it may be a little bit hard for you to see this, but there are 4 dots that are up inside of the grounds bin, and each dot is supposed to represent approximately 20 grams of beans when you fill it up to this line. I noticed that it does tend to be a little bit generous, at least with the bean size that I was using. I got 1 dot right around 25 to 30 grams every time I tried it, all the way up to 4 dots, which is supposed to be 80 grams. I was getting about 90, 95 grams. So that's just something to keep in mind if you're doing something with a little bit more specific of weight, like a pour over or something like that, where weight really is going to matter. It is just a little bit generous in my findings, although if you kind of underdose it just a little bit, it gets it right around perfect every time. And of course, if you're using a scale, that's something that you won't need to worry about. But this just makes it super easy in the morning. It also has a rubberized lid up top, and it has a magnet actually on the bottom to lock the catch bin in place, and there we go, nice and solid. And the rubber also keeps the grounds directed right into the container, and to eliminate as much static and grinds all over the place as possible. Now onto the lid of the Ode. The lid has a nice handy guide on it. I've also found that these are just a little bit generous for what the dial says compared to what the machine lid says here. If I was going to be following this guide, I would go one step coarser in every single brew method that I was using. That's for my personal taste. I do find that from cold brew all the way down to, they say Prismo, so like a really fine pour over, or for an AeroPress Prismo attachment, something like that. It does a really good job of being a quick, handy reference. It's not going to be your day-to-day reference, but if you're just looking at it, oh, I was doing a pour over, now I need to go into drip, gives you a really good directional reference to start off with. Now let's talk about the grinder itself. So the grinder itself is quite simple, actually. It is just a single button up front, a very large and very in charge dial up here, which goes all the way from 1 through 11, with 1 being the finest and 11 being the coarsest. And it is stepped, so you're getting steps in between each of these settings. And you get approximately 33 settings on here because you're dividing each of those settings into 3. And it does a great job at every step, for as far as I can tell. And along with that, I do have some of the grind from this machine here. And this is on this side here is going to be the 11. So this is what cold brew or a French press would be rated at. And the consistency, as most grinders do handle cold brew a little bit less consistently than a finer grind, is actually quite good on this. I had no issues with brewing cold brew. I actually took this home for a couple of weeks, and I had no issue brewing cold brew, French press at this setting without any issues at all. I may have found that I needed to reduce the time just a little bit to accommodate some of the fines that were in there, but I find that I have to do that with most home grinders anyways. And overall, it was a real pleasure to use for cold brew and things like that. And then over here on this side is the finest setting. This is at the 1 on the grinder. And the 1 is going to do really, really excellent for, a really fine pour over, or as the reference guide on the lid says, something like a Fellow, or excuse me, an AeroPress attachment, like a Prismo. It's not quite fine enough for, say, a mocha pot or any of those pressurized espresso methods. This is definitely going to be just for brew methods or drip brew methods that are going to be using paper or percolation or immersion, like a French press or a cold brew. Definitely doesn't get quite fine enough for anything, espresso worthy, but it also is not built for that. This is meant to be a home brew grinder, just for brew and do brew as well as it can. And to help you along with making your brew in the morning, there's a couple of handy things that this grinder does, especially when you're single dosing, that really take a shine to it, or that I really take a shine to. On the side here, there is like a commercial bolt grinder, often has these knockers, but they did build a knocker into the side. And so after you're done grinding, you just go ahead and give it a couple of taps, and that gets any of your retention from up in the Burr set out down into the grounds bin instead of up in the burrs, so that you get all the coffee that you ground out, and on your next batch of beans, especially if you're switching beans, you're not getting any old coffee grounds remaining in there. I find that this feature works pretty well. You still do get some retention when you pull out the ground chute. Using something like RDT, where you're putting a little bit of water up in the hopper, just a drop or two, and stirring the beans, or even doing it when you're measuring the beans out. Just a drop or two, or even a mister, has really helped with the static, just like with any other grinder. But I don't find the static or retention to be overly noticeable in any aspects. It is getting to be winter time around here, so static is growing or is increasing with any grinder that we see, and it's not noticeably worse than any other grinder of this size and this compact that I've tried. The other thing to talk about here is going to be the Burr set. So the burrs on the Ode are 64 millimeter vertically mounted burrs instead of the traditional horizontally mounted burrs that you'd get in most home grinders. They are 64 millimeter flat burrs, and they're vertically mounted, so they're mounted in this orientation versus this. And what this does is it does give you just a different style of operation for how your beans are grinding. It tends to reduce retention, which is why a lot of bulk commercial batch grinders do use vertical burrs as well. Some larger, well-known names like the EK43, they're using vertical burrs as well to allow quicker throughput and to allow a little bit less retention during the grinding process than something with a forward-moving chute to allow the grounds out. And it also means that it can be more compact because everything can just go right through. And the Ode is a very narrow, not too large coffee grinder. It's only about 5 to 6 inches wide, and it's just under a foot deep. So, most home countertops, this is definitely going to fit on, and it's going to look great doing it because the matte black finish is honestly pretty stunning in person, especially if you're pairing it with like a matte black drip brewer or something like that, like a ratio 6 or something like that. It is a really beautiful combination. And let's get to some grinding actually so that we can see how loud it was. Fellow really designed this to be, have quiet, smooth operation, and they've actually integrated a PID controller into the logic of the grinder. What this does is it controls the speed of the burrs continuously while it's grinding, meaning that every bean that goes down into the hopper and into the burrs is getting approximately the same burr speed so that they can get the same grind out the bottom at the end of the day. And what this also allows it to do is to have an auto stop function. So, if you're doing a pour over in the morning or something like that, and you are heating up your kettle, you're getting your filter prepared, or you're getting your French press ready, or anything like that, You know, the last thing you want to hear when you're grinding is the sound of empty burrs just running and running, just telling you, you know, you need to get over your coffee grounds. With the Ode, like you're going to see in just a minute, it automatically stops a few seconds after all the beans are out of the hopper. So the grounds are ready to go when you are, instead of the other way around. So I'm going to go ahead, and I have this all the way at an 11, which is going to be the coarsest. And I'm going to go ahead and just start grinding. I have about 35 grams of beans in here, and we'll see when it stops. And you get an end beep to indicate that the cycle is done. You don't have to push anything to get this to stop. It does do it automatically. And I'm going to give it a couple of knocks just to make sure that you are getting everything out that you can. And as you can see, a little bit of chaff up front. I do have this well aligned on here, but it is not the cleanest grinder in the world. Although it's not super staticky or retention-y, it just seems that during the grinding process, just a little bit gets above and beyond the grind container. I found that keeping the grind container open without the lid helps just a little bit, but then you get a little bit more messiness from static. So you kind of have to trade off which is better for you. I don't mind this, especially because it does come with a nice grinder brush. I just brush it off every morning and you're good to go. But if you do mind it, you know, a little bit more humidity in your beans with a little bit of water, or removing that lid may be a better way to go. So I've got this all knocked, and I'm just going to go ahead and pull this out. And you can see just a little bit of grounds up top. It's nothing critical. And we've got nice coarse grounds in there. And during the operation, as you could tell, it's super quiet. There's not a lot of sound to it at all. You're not getting a lot of mechanical sound. You're really just hearing those burrs spinning, and it's really very, very quiet. So yeah, and then if you're going to pour these out, the fins on here would do a very great job at guiding these out and onto the plate. And in my findings, you know, coarse all the way to fine works super well in pouring out with these fins. So what I would say about the Fellow Ode is that it is overbuilt for what it is and over-designed, and it is purposely done so. You know, it has all the bells and whistles that a drip brew grinder can have without having anything unnecessary or adding difficulty to the operation. You get one-touch operation, quite a few macro and micro grind settings to choose from everything from cold brew all the way to a fine pour over. And you get a little knock bar, you get cleaning tools, and you get a great little magnetic catch bin. And it's really been a pleasure to work with in the mornings for my coffee routine, and I think it will be for yours as well. So thank you so much for watching. We really do appreciate you watching our videos, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.